Good morning, boys and girls. I hope you're all doing very well on the Sunday morning. Well, we've finished with the book of Judges, but we're going to look at a story that actually happened during the time of the Judges as well. And this is out of the book called Ruth. It's a rather short book in the Old Testament. So, of course, speaking about the Old Testament, we're looking at the Bible, God's word, God speaking to us, and we're going to look at the book called Ruth, like I said. And we will read chapter 1, verses 1 to 9, and then verses 14 to 18, and then verse 22. I'll say it again a little bit slower. Ruth 1, verses 1 to 9, then verses 14 to 18, and then verse 22. Well, let's listen carefully. This is the word of the Lord. There was a time when Israel didn't have kings to rule over them, but they had leaders to help them. This is a story about some things that happened during that time. There wasn't enough food in the land of Judah, so a man went to live for a while in the country of Moab. He was from Bethlehem in Judah. His wife and 2 sons went with him. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites whose home had been in Bethlehem in Judah. They went to Moab and lived there. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, died, so she was left with her 2 sons. They married women from Moab. One was named Orpah. The other was named Ruth. Naomi's family lived in Moab for about 10 years. Then Mahlon and Chilion also died, so Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. While Naomi was in Moab, she heard that the Lord had helped his people. He had begun to provide food for them again. So Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law prepared to go from Moab back to her home. She left the place where she had been living. Her daughters-in-law went with her. They started out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Both of you go back. Each of you go to your own mother's home. You were kind to your husbands who have died. You have also been kind to me. So may the Lord be just as kind to you. May the Lord help each of you find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye. They broke down and wept loudly. When they heard that, they broke down and wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth held on to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't try to make me leave you and go back. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I'll die, and there my body will be buried. I won't let even death separate you from me. If I do, may the Lord punish me greatly." Naomi realized that Ruth had made up her mind to go with her, so she stopped trying to make her go back. So Naomi returned from Moab. Ruth, her daughter-in-law from Moab, came with her. They arrived in Bethlehem just when people were beginning to harvest the barley. So we will read next week. We will continue reading. We'll hear what happens to Ruth and Naomi, but this is quite a very special story. So Naomi is from Judah. She's an Israelite. And she goes to Moab, and there her sons marry Moabite women. but her sons die and her husband dies, and she decides she wants to go back to Judah because the people are doing well there. And one of her daughters-in-law, Orpah, she decides to go back to her home. But Ruth is saying, no, I want to stay with you. And she says something very special. She says, your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. But she comes from Moab. She is not an Israelite. And this is very, very interesting because I don't know if you remember, we did the story of Abraham and God's promises to Abraham way back. And one of the promises that God made to Abraham was that all nations would be blessed through his offspring, through his children, all nations, meaning not just Israel. And we are getting a little bit of a taste of that in this story. We see how this lady from Moab called Ruth becomes part of God's family. She says, your people will be my people and your God will be my God. So she becomes part of God's family. And she is not from Israel. She is from Moab. So in that way, the blessing of God comes to all nations. So let's look at a few questions, just so we can remember the story when we continue next week. First question, why did Naomi want to go back to Judah? Then second question, why does Ruth want to go back with her? And then last question, how is one of God's promises made to Abraham fulfilled in this story? Well, that's it for today, boys and girls. We'll read next week what happens next to Ruth and Naomi. I will see you. Bye-bye.